Freud's theory of the female psyche didn't stop at early childhood experiences. It extended into the influence of societal pressures. He observed that, as women grew older, these external pressures didn't merely guide their behavior, they acted as powerful forces that reshaped their internal map. These cultural norms and societal expectations could redefine the emotional landscape, altering a woman's understanding of her desires, her ambitions, and even her sense of self. The societal expectations placed on women during Freud's time were rigid and restrictive. Women were often encouraged to adopt passive, nurturing roles, and were discouraged from expressing ambition, intellectual desire, or assertiveness. Freud argued that these cultural boundaries were not just external influences, they rewrote the very map of the female psyche, making women doubt their true instincts and desires. In his view, these societal pressures were more than mere guidelines, they were internalized ideals, embedded deep within the unconscious mind. Women began to see themselves not as individuals with their own unique desires, but as reflections of the roles assigned to them. These roles were often contradictory, creating deep internal conflicts. On the one hand, women were expected to be loving, self-sacrificing mothers, while on the other, they were taught that their intellectual, creative, and sexual desires were secondary to their roles as caregivers and wives. This dissonance created a psychological tug-of-war, where women struggled to reconcile their authentic selves with the roles society expected them to play. Freud saw this as one of the most profound sources of anxiety, self-doubt, and dissatisfaction for women. The map of their inner world became distorted often, without them even realizing it because of the pressure to fit into a mold that wasn't their own. What's fascinating is that this struggle is not just historical. Even today, societal expectations still shape the way women see themselves and their desires. The modern woman is still faced with conflicting ideals, the pressure to balance career ambitions with family expectations, the constant reinforcement of unrealistic beauty standards, and the subtle but pervasive idea that a woman's worth is tied to her relationship status or ability to care for others. Yet, just as Freud pointed out that these pressures redefined the map, modern psychology offers us tools to rewrite it. Through conscious self-awareness, therapy, and personal growth, women can challenge these societal pressures and begin to reclaim their authentic desires. By recognizing how these external forces have shaped their emotional landscapes, women can begin the process of reorienting their internal compass. This concept is supported by modern studies on neuroplasticity and emotional intelligence, which show that the brain is capable of rewiring itself through conscious effort. By challenging internalized cultural norms and rethinking the roles we've been conditioned to play, we can begin to reshape To truly understand the complexity of the female psyche, we must begin in the earliest stages of emotional development. Freud believed that before language and reason took hold, the mind was already laying the foundations of its psychological map. This was the pre-Oedipal stage, the time before the famous Oedipus complex, where the groundwork for emotional security and attachment was set. At this critical stage, a child's first bond with a primary caregiver, typically, the mother, creates the initial emotional coordinates that will guide her through life. Freud emphasized that the quality of this bond could either create a foundation of trust or lead to emotional instability. For women, these early imprints had a profound impact on how they would later approach relationships, trust, intimacy, and even self. If the relationship with the mother was nurturing and secure, the emotional map would have a solid base, one that provided a sense of safety and security. But if the caregiving was inconsistent or neglectful, the map would be filled with emotional gaps and detours, leading to challenges in later relationships. Freud suggested that these early impressions were so powerful that they could influence women's emotional lives for decades, often in ways they were not even conscious of. This idea of early imprints is not only central to Freud's work, but it has been validated by modern psychological research. Attachment theory, for example, shows that the way a child bonds with her caregiver shapes her future ability to form healthy relationships. A secure attachment leads to a confident, resilient adult, while an insecure attachment can lead to patterns of mistrust and anxiety. Freud's insight into the pre-Oedipal stage gives us a window into understanding how early experiences form the emotional map that guides a person's life. But this understanding also leads to another critical question. How can we change these early imprints if they have led to patterns of self-doubt, emotional insecurity, or unfulfilling relationships. The good news is that these early imprints, while powerful, are not fixed. The human mind is capable of change, of rewriting old narratives and forming new emotional bonds. Just as these early emotional imprints shaped the course of our lives, we can consciously work to reshape them by developing healthier relationships, by becoming more self-aware, and by confronting the emotional barriers that have held us back. In the next part, we will explore how societal expectations, these invisible borders on the psychological map, begin to shape a woman's sense of self. Freud noted that these cultural pressures didn't just affect behavior, they often rewrote the internal map itself, leading women to question their own desires, instincts, and worth. But before we continue, take a moment to reflect. What early emotional imprints have shaped you? How have your formative relationships influenced the way you navigate trust, intimacy, and self-worth today? The first steps in mapping the mind involve recognizing these foundational imprints and understanding how they continue to shape us. Freud's view of the unconscious extended far beyond just a storehouse of repressed desires and unresolved conflicts. For Freud, the unconscious was also a vast reservoir of untapped potential, especially for women, whose capabilities and desires were often hidden under layers of societal conditioning. He observed that the potential for greatness, creativity, and self-determination resided within the female psyche, waiting to be unlocked. However, this potential was often suppressed by the constraints of cultural expectations. The societal blueprint for women, what they were expected to be, how they were expected to behave, acted as a barrier, preventing many of their innate talents and desires from coming to the surface. This created a powerful paradox. Women's unconscious minds were brimming with possibilities, yet much of this potential remained dormant. According to Freud, the very mind that could house brilliance, creativity, and independence was simultaneously conditioned to keep these qualities hidden, constrained by external forces like family expectations, societal norms, and gender roles. In this light, the unconscious wasn't just a place for repressed desires, it was also a space where unfulfilled capacities languished, waiting for the right conditions to come forth. Freud suggested that much of women's latent potential, whether it be their intellectual brilliance, their creativity, or their capacity for self-determination, remained dormant, held in check by the confines of the roles they were expected to play. But this raises an important question. How much of our untapped potential remains hidden within us, waiting for the right moment to surface? And what can we do to unlock it? Freud's theory implies that by understanding the forces that suppress these latent capabilities, societal expectations, family pressures, and even unconscious fears, we can begin to unearth the potential that has been lying dormant all along. Modern feminist theory and psychological research have given us new ways to explore this idea. Women's potential is still often constrained by societal expectations, but more and more, women are finding ways to break free from these restrictions. By challenging the roles that society has laid out for them, women are beginning to access those hidden parts of themselves that were previously kept under wraps. In the next part, we will explore how the external pressures of society shape the internal map of the female psyche. We'll look at how cultural expectations rewrite a woman's desires, often making her doubt her own instincts and needs. This external influence can distort the internal compass, leaving women feeling disconnected from their true selves. But before we proceed, think about this. What parts of you have been conditioned to stay hidden or suppressed? Which desires, dreams, or talents might you have unconsciously suppressed in order to conform to societal expectations? The hidden map Freud spoke of is not just about repression, it's about revealing the parts of ourselves that have long been kept in the shadows, waiting for us to rediscover them. As we dive deeper into Freud's hidden map of the female mind, we encounter a critical crossroads: the influence of societal pressures. These external forces not only shape behavior, but also reconfigure the very way women perceive themselves. Freud proposed that the external world doesn't just guide a woman's actions, it rewrites the map of her mind, making her question and sometimes even suppress her true desires and instincts. Think about the expectations that women face from birth, the roles they are expected to fulfill, the behaviors they are conditioned to adopt. Freud argued that these societal pressures act as invisible borders, shaping the map of the female psyche from the outside in. These borders often define what a woman is supposed to want, what she is supposed to look like, and, more profoundly, what she is allowed to desire. In his analysis, Freud identified that these cultural boundaries often forced women to doubt themselves. They started to question whether their desires were truly their own, or if they were simply reflections of external pressures. These ideals, deeply ingrained in the unconscious, made it incredibly difficult for women to recognize or express their authentic needs. This is where the internal conflict begins: the tension between societal expectations and personal desires, between the roles women were told to play and the roles they longed to embody. For Freud, this conflict wasn't just psychological, it was also deeply emotional. He argued that when women internalize these societal norms, they begin to suppress their authentic desires. This suppression leads to a disconnection from one's true self, resulting in feelings of anxiety, self-doubt, and chronic dissatisfaction. The unconscious, once a space for unfulfilled potential, becomes a battleground, a place where the authentic self is constantly at odds with the roles imposed by society. This theme is echoed in modern psychology, where we understand that social conditioning plays a significant role in shaping our internal world. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, shows us that the mind is not fixed. It is, in fact, highly responsive to its environment. The neural pathways we create are shaped not only by our personal experiences, but also by the societal structures we inhabit. This means that the cultural scripts we internalize can literally rewire the brain, altering the way we see ourselves and others. Yet, this presents an empowering possibility. Just as societal pressures shape us, so too can conscious effort reshape these internal maps. By questioning and challenging the roles we've been assigned, we can begin to reconnect with our true desires and reorient our internal compass toward authenticity. This is where the real work begins, recognizing the invisible forces that have shaped us and learning to rewrite them. In the next part, we will explore how Freud's concept of internalized ideals functions in the female psyche. We'll examine how these ideals, which often reflect cultural narratives about femininity, become embedded deep within the unconscious, further distorting a woman's ability to live authentically. These ideals, often seen as social aspirations, are in fact subconscious imprints that limit personal growth and fulfillment. But for now, take a moment to reflect on this. How much of what you desire is truly your own? How much of it has been shaped by societal expectations, family pressure, or cultural ideals? The hidden map Freud left us with is not only about what we've been taught to desire, it's also about uncovering what has been silenced within us for too long. To truly understand the hidden map Freud proposed for the female mind, we must begin at the very origin of psychological development, before the complexities of adulthood, before the tangled webs of relationships and personal desires. There were the earliest moments of emotional life, the pre-verbal years that laid the foundation for all that came afterward. Freud believed that during these formative years, long before the development of language or reason, the mind was already starting to chart its internal map. It was during this time that the mind's compass was set spatially in terms of attachment, trust, and safety. This was the moment when a child began to sense whether or not the world was a safe place to explore, whether love could be counted on, and whether emotional needs would be met or neglected. For women, Freud argued, the first major landmark on this map was formed in what he called the pre-Oedipal stage. This stage was crucial, as it set the emotional coordinates that would guide many of a woman's future choices. At this stage, the bond with the primary caregiver, often the mother, formed the emotional basis of a woman's future relationships. If the bond was positive, nurturing, and consistent, it would foster a secure sense of trust and emotional safety. However, if the bond was neglectful or inconsistent, the emotional map could become filled with gaps, detours, and hidden traps. These early imprints would remain embedded in the unconscious, guiding decisions and patterns of behavior throughout a woman's life, often without her conscious awareness. The way a woman approached trust, intimacy, and even her sense of self-worth was directly influenced by this early emotional map. As we move deeper into Freud's framework, we see that his concept of the unconscious was not simply a dark, repressed space where unacknowledged desires and memories resided. It was also a repository of past experiences, feelings, and impressions, particularly those formed in early childhood. These imprints could significantly influence how women navigated future emotional landscapes. But the question remains, how much of our present selves are shaped by these early experiences, and how much can be changed or redefined? Freud believed that while these early imprints were powerful, they were not fixed. The map of the female psyche was a living document, one that could be revised, recharted, and reshaped over time, particularly with conscious effort. Modern psychology has since confirmed some of Freud's insights. The concept of attachment theory, for instance, explores how early bonding experiences with caregivers shape future emotional relationships. Research into neuroplasticity shows us that the brain is capable of change throughout life, reinforcing Freud's belief that we can redefine the emotional paths laid out in our early years. In the next part, we'll continue to explore how societal pressures and cultural norms begin to shape the female psyche. We'll look at how external influences, such as family expectations and societal roles, can act as invisible borders on the psychological map, influencing women's desires, choices, and self-concept. But for now, take a moment to reflect on the question: what imprints have been left on your emotional map? How do these early experiences continue to influence the way you see yourself and the world around you? Freud's public theories are famous, even infamous, for their impact on modern psychology. Concepts like the Oedipus complex, repression, and dream symbolism have long shaped our understanding of the unconscious mind. These ideas are often what we remember when we think of Freud: bold, revolutionary, and deeply controversial. However, hidden beneath these popularized theories is an entirely different layer of Freud's work, especially regarding female psychology. These lesser-known ideas were buried under the weight of criticism, mistranslation, or simply ignored because they didn't fit the cultural norms of Freud's time. But in his private letters, essays, and more obscure lectures, Freud painted a different picture of the female mind, one that was not an afterthought, but rather a rich, complex, and multi-layered structure that interacted with the unconscious in ways that were unique to women. It's important to note that Freud believed the female mind operated under the same general architecture as the male mind: the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. Yet, how these levels of consciousness expressed themselves differed. For women, this expression was profoundly influenced by early relationships, societal pressures, and inner conflicts that played out over the course of their lives. In particular, Freud paid special attention to the importance of early relational bonds, especially those with primary caregivers. He believed that these formative connections left deep emotional imprints that would later influence choices in adulthood. These imprints acted like invisible landmarks on the map of the mind, subtly guiding everything from trust and intimacy to ambition and self. But Freud didn't stop there. He saw the unconscious not merely as a repository for suppressed desires, but as a wellspring of untapped potential. However, for women, much of this potential remained hidden, constrained by societal expectations and cultural norms. This creates a fascinating paradox. The mind holds within it extraordinary capabilities, but at the same time, it can be conditioned to keep those capabilities dormant. This dynamic leads us to an essential question: what parts of your own personality have been silenced because they didn't fit the expectations of others? Modern psychology and feminist theory have since expanded upon Freud's ideas, exploring how external forces, such as family, society, and culture, shape a person's identity and desires. Neuroplasticity, attachment theory, and even epigenetics all echo Freud's understanding that our inner life is a reflection of the world around us. Our early experiences and interactions with others shape the paths we take in life, and those paths can be redefined with conscious effort. The hidden map Freud left behind is not static. It's a living, breathing blueprint, one that is constantly being redrawn based on new experiences, relationships, and personal awakenings. This is where the most transformative aspect of Freud's ideas comes into play. The idea that we have the power to navigate and even rewrite the map of our inner worlds. In the next part, we'll begin to examine this hidden map in detail. We'll explore how Freud believed the female. Imagine, for a moment, that there exists a map, not a physical one, but a psychological blueprint that could reveal the intricate and hidden territories of the female mind. A map so detailed, so revolutionary, that it has remained mostly unseen for over a century. Even today, most people have never glimpsed it, let alone grasped its profound implications. Why do certain thoughts linger, despite our best efforts to dismiss them? Why do emotions sometimes seem to control our decisions, pulling the strings of reason and logic? Why do patterns in relationships repeat themselves, even when we swear they never will again? These are not trivial questions, but they are ones that Freud began to answer in his exploration of the unconscious. Today, we will walk together through the corridors of Freud's lesser-known ideas, peeling away the layers of one of the most controversial and illuminating minds in psychology. As we dive deeper, you'll come to understand not only what Freud proposed, but also how his hidden framework of the female mind could unlock new ways of seeing yourself and those around you. I promise you, the most powerful and surprising insight awaits at the end of this journey. Stay with me, and let's begin. Before we begin our deep dive, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your interaction helps bring these conversations to a broader audience, allowing more people to seek a deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. Trust me, what we will discover today may change the way you think forever. Freud's most famous public theories, such as the Oedipus complex, repression, and dream symbolism, are well known, and in many ways, infamous. Yet beneath these oversimplified narratives lie subtler, more profound maps of the mind. In particular, Freud's theories about the female psyche have often been ignored, misinterpreted, or buried under criticism. In his private writings and obscure lectures, however, a much fuller vision of the female mind emerges. It is one where the psyche is not an afterthought, but a complex, multi-layered structure that interacts with the unconscious in unique and profound ways. Freud believed the female mind operated within the same basic architecture as the male mind, the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. But the way these layers expressed themselves in women was profoundly shaped by their early life experiences, developmental milestones, societal pressures, and inner conflicts. For Freud, early relational bonds, especially those with caregivers, left indelible emotional imprints that could guide choices and behavior for decades, often without conscious awareness. These imprints acted as invisible landmarks on the map, subtly influencing everything from trust and intimacy to ambition and self. But there's more. Freud also believed that the unconscious was a repository of not only suppressed desires, but of unfulfilled potentials. For women, he suggested, these latent capacities were often constrained by societal expectations. Much of their brilliance, creativity, and self-determination remained dormant, waiting for the right conditions to surface. Think about it. This creates a striking paradox. The mind holds extraordinary possibilities, but the same mind can be conditioned to keep those possibilities hidden. What does that mean for you? What parts of your personality have been silenced because they didn't match what society expected? Are your current aspirations truly your own, or have they been shaped by Freud's exploration of the female psyche took a turn toward understanding how the mind protects itself from emotional pain and conflict. In his theory, defense mechanisms are psychological strategies that the unconscious mind uses to cope with anxiety, stress, and inner turmoil. These mechanisms are natural, protecting the psyche from harm by preventing overwhelming feelings from surfacing. But Freud also noted that, when overused or improperly applied, these defenses could become barriers that hinder personal growth. For women, Freud believed that defense mechanisms could be particularly pronounced. Society's expectations of women as nurturers, caregivers, and self-sacrificing partners often meant that women had to repress their desires or suppress their individuality in order to fulfill these roles. In response to this, women's defense mechanisms could become not just emotional protections, but psychological walls that kept them from confronting the full extent of their desires and emotions. These defenses, such as denial, repression, projection, and rationalization, helped women maintain emotional stability in the face of external pressures. Yet, these same mechanisms could also prevent them from fully embracing their true selves. For instance, a woman might repress her desire for independence or creativity, because those desires conflicted with the image of the selfless mother or wife that society demanded. Or, she might rationalize her dissatisfaction in relationships, convincing herself that this was simply what women are supposed to endure. The danger of these defense mechanisms, Freud argued, is that they became internalized, preventing women from fully confronting their unconscious fears and desires. These psychological walls built to protect the psyche became permanent structures that hindered growth, preventing women from exploring the full depth of their potential. Freud saw these defenses as essential for survival in a world that offered little room for personal exploration. However, when these defenses became too rigid, they acted as barriers to personal transformation. Modern psychology has expanded upon Freud's ideas, acknowledging that while defense mechanisms are essential for emotional survival, they must be consciously recognized and addressed in order to foster personal growth. Today, therapy and self-awareness are powerful tools that help individuals break down these barriers, allowing them to embrace their authentic selves and heal from the wounds that these defenses have been protecting. For women, recognizing and dismantling these defense mechanisms is key to finding a sense of self that is not defined by societal roles or external expectations. This process involves facing the uncomfortable truths about one's desires and fears, acknowledging the parts of the self that have been hidden or repressed, and challenging the internalized norms that limit personal expression. In the next part, we will explore how the final piece of Freud's hidden map reveals the most profound aspect of the female psyche that could radically change the way we understand the mind. This final revelation, though never explicitly stated by Freud, offers a key to breaking free from the internal walls and embracing the full potential of the female psyche. But for now, Reflect on this. What defense mechanisms do you use to protect yourself from emotional pain or conflict? How have these defenses shaped the way you interact with the world? And how might you begin to break them down in order to uncover your true self? After journeying through Freud's complex and sometimes controversial exploration of the female psyche, we arrive at the final, most liberating revelation. The female mind, like the map Freud created, is not fixed. It is a living, evolving entity, one that can be rewritten, reshaped, and redefined at any moment. Freud's unfinished work leaves us with the empowering insight that the map is not a rigid, permanent structure, but an invitation to explore, change, and reclaim parts of ourselves that have been buried by societal pressures, internalized ideals, and emotional defense mechanisms. Freud's model, though groundbreaking, was based on the constraints and cultural norms of his time. It was a model influenced by a patriarchal view of women, where roles were rigidly defined and desires were often suppressed. But the greatest insight Freud left behind, whether intentional or not, is that the map is incomplete, particularly when it comes to women. The boundaries are not set in stone, and the roads that were once seen as inevitable are, in reality, paths that can be altered. The map Freud drew, with its roads, borders, and hidden territories, is not a limitation. It's an invitation to reclaim lost territories, to redraw boundaries, and to step into the unknown. For women, this means breaking free from the constraints of historical expectations and redefining what it means to be female. This is where modern neuroscience and psychology align with Freud's ideas in a powerful way. Through conscious effort and self-awareness, we can begin to rewrite the mental map that was drawn for us by societal expectations. Neuroplasticity shows us that the brain is capable of changing throughout our lives, meaning that our patterns of thought, behavior, and emotion can also be rewritten. By choosing to step off the paths laid before us and question the societal maps that have shaped us, we can begin to carve new roads and build new pathways toward authentic self-expression and personal fulfillment. Freud hinted at this in his writings, but it is only now, with modern scientific understanding, that we can see the full potential of rewriting our inner maps. By challenging the societal scripts that have been handed to us, Freud's theory of eros and thanatos, the fundamental drives at the core of the human psyche, provides a profound lens through which to view the complexities of the female mind. These drives, according to Freud, are not merely abstract concepts. They are powerful forces that shape our behaviors, desires, and decisions. Eros, the life drive, is associated with growth, connection, creativity, and love. It is the force that drives individuals to build, nurture, and create, whether it's in relationships, art, or intellectual pursuits. Thanatos, the death drive, is the opposite. It represents withdrawal, self-destruction, and a pull toward stasis or annihilation. Freud believed that these two drives were constantly at war within the psyche, particularly in the female mind, where their interplay often created a delicate balance. For Freud, the tension between eros and thanatos was not just psychological but existential. He argued that while the life drive eros was nurturing, relational, and creative, it was often constrained or distorted by the destructive pull of Thanatos. Women, in particular, could feel the pressure of this duality as they navigated their roles in a society that demanded self-sacrifice, emotional caregiving, and passivity. This conflict could manifest in self-sabotaging behaviors, such as withdrawing from opportunities, repressing creative impulses, or engaging in destructive patterns that limited personal growth. Freud observed that the female psyche often had to balance these two opposing forces in unique ways. The nurturing, relational drive of eros could be constricted by unacknowledged self-destructive impulses. This internal struggle could manifest in a woman's reluctance to embrace her own potential or engage fully in life. She might sabotage her own success, resist new opportunities, or become trapped in unhealthy patterns of behavior. Yet, Freud also believed that the balance between eros and thanatos could provide profound insights into a woman's inner world. If one could understand the ways these two forces were interacting, if one could decode the symbols in dreams or identify the patterns of self-sabotage, then the process of self-discovery could begin. This recognition allowed for the possibility of breaking free from the destructive forces of Thanatos and embracing the life-affirming potential of eros. Modern psychology has expanded on Freud's ideas of these drives, with many theorists acknowledging that we are not just shaped by one force, but by the interaction of multiple drives and desires. Feminist psychoanalysis, in particular, has focused on how societal pressures and gender roles can distort the balance between these drives, leading women to suppress or distort their life-affirming energies in favor of self-destructive patterns. In the next part, we will explore Freud's view on identity formation. He suggested that women's identities were often defined by their relationships with others, particularly family roles such as daughter, partner, or mother. This relational identity could make it difficult for women to discover their true selves, as their sense of self was always shaped in relation to others. But for now, reflect on this. How have you seen the battle between eros and thanatos in your own life? Are there areas where self-destructive patterns or fears have hindered your growth? Identifying these forces within your psyche can be the first step in reclaiming the balance between your life-giving desires and your darker, more limiting impulses. Freud's exploration of the female psyche reaches a crucial point when it touches on identity formation. He suggested that a woman's sense of self was often shaped not by her own inner desires and goals, but by her relationships with others, particularly her roles as daughter, partner, mother, and caregiver. These relational identities, Freud argued, could often mask the true self, making it difficult for women to access their authentic desires or define themselves independently of the people and roles around them. In Freud's time, societal norms reinforced the idea that a woman's identity was inherently relational. Women were not expected to find their self-worth in their individual aspirations or personal growth. Rather, their worth was often measured by their roles in relation to others. A woman's value was tied to how well she fulfilled the roles of wife, mother, or daughter, and her desires were often seen as secondary to those of the people around her. Freud recognized that these expectations created an identity crisis for many women. Their sense of self was often fragmented, shaped by external pressures and the constant need to fulfill the needs of others, rather than by their own desires. This relational identity was particularly pronounced in Freud's era, when women were expected to embody nurturing, self-sacrificial roles. These societal norms had a profound impact on the formation of identity. A woman's sense of self was less about who she was as an individual and more about how she fit into a larger social framework, whether as a dutiful daughter, a loving wife, or a devoted mother. This external focus on roles meant that women often struggled to discover who they truly were, separate from the roles they were expected to play. Freud saw this as a barrier to true self-discovery. Identity, in his view, needed to be more than just the reflection of relationships. It needed to be an expression of one's inner desires, goals, and aspirations. Yet, for many women, this inner self was obscured by societal pressures and the roles they were conditioned to play. Women were taught that their value lay in their relationships with others, not in their individuality or self-expression. This led to an ongoing tension between the roles they were expected to fill and the deeper, more authentic aspects of themselves that often went unacknowledged. Modern feminist psychoanalysis has expanded on this idea by highlighting how these external definitions of identity continue to shape women today. The idea that women's identities are relational, defined by their roles within family structures, romantic partnerships, or social circles, remains a powerful force in shaping how women see themselves. The challenge, however, is that these external definitions often leave little room for women to define themselves outside of these roles. In a world that continues to emphasize relational roles, the task of discovering and asserting one's true self becomes even more difficult. In the next part, we will dive deeper into the role of defense mechanisms in the female psyche. Freud believed that defense mechanisms were natural protections against emotional pain, but for women, these defenses could often become barriers to growth, reinforcing the walls that kept them from truly exploring their identities and desires. But for now, reflect on this. How much of your identity has been shaped by external definitions? How much of your sense of self is based on fulfilling roles for others, rather than expressing your true desires? Recognizing where your identity is rooted in relational roles can be the first step in discovering who you are beyond the expectations placed on you.
Freud's concept of repetition compulsion is one of the most fascinating and often misunderstood ideas in his theory of the unconscious. He observed that the unconscious mind has a tendency to recreate emotional situations from the past, even when those situations are painful or detrimental. This is not a sign of weakness, as some might assume, but rather evidence that the mind seeks mastery over unresolved emotional experiences. In the context of the female psyche, Freud believed that repetition compulsion often revolved around unresolved emotional themes, particularly themes of validation, emotional safety, and the need for recognition. For women, these themes often tied back to their earliest relationships, particularly with caregivers. Freud saw the unconscious as a repository not just for repressed desires, but for unprocessed emotional experiences. And he suggested that the mind unconsciously tries to resolve these experiences by recreating them in later relationships. This can manifest in various ways. A woman might, for instance, repeatedly choose relationships that mirror early experiences of conditional love or emotional neglect. These relationships may feel familiar, even though they are emotionally painful or unsatisfying. But on a deeper level, Freud argued, the mind is not trying to repeat the pain for its own sake, it is trying to resolve it, to find closure, and to get it right. This time, the unconscious mind believes that by recreating the same emotional experiences, it can find a way to master and overcome them. However, Freud also recognized that this tendency can become self-centered. The compulsion to recreate unresolved emotional experiences can keep a person trapped in unhealthy patterns, making it difficult to move forward. The key to breaking this cycle, Freud believed, was awareness, understanding that the mind is repeating these patterns unconsciously and beginning the work of consciously confronting and resolving the underlying emotional issues. This concept of repetition compulsion is still relevant today. Modern psychology understands that our past emotional experiences particularly those from early childhood, shape the way we approach relationships in adulthood. We may unconsciously recreate dynamics that mirror those early experiences, even when they cause us pain.
But the difference today is that we have more tools to recognize and break these patterns.
Therapy, mindfulness, and self-awareness can help us identify the unconscious forces that drive our behavior, allowing us to make more conscious, intentional choices. In the next part, we will dive into Freud's theory of Eros and Thanatos, two opposing drives that exist within the human psyche. The drive for life, growth, and connection, Eros, and the drive for death, destruction, or stasis, Thanatos. Freud believed that these drives were particularly pronounced in the female psyche, where they often created a delicate balance between the nurturing and creative forces of Eros and the self-destructive impulses of Thanatos. But for now, reflect on this. How have you seen repetition compulsion manifest in your own life or relationships? What patterns do you find yourself recreating, and what might those patterns be trying to teach you? Understanding these emotional cycles is an important step in freeing yourself from the unconscious patterns that limit growth.
Freud placed a significant emphasis on the role of dreams in understanding the unconscious mind. He believed that dreams were not random or meaningless. Rather, they were coded messages from the unconscious, revealing the hidden regions of the psyche. For Freud, dreams were like maps, roads leading to uncharted emotional territories, hidden desires, unresolved conflicts, and even solutions to personal dilemmas. In his view, the symbols within dreams acted as coordinates, guiding the dreamer through their unconscious mind. These recurring symbols, whether a locked door, a journey through unfamiliar terrain, or an image of a bridge, could offer valuable insight into the unresolved areas of the psyche. Freud theorized that each symbol held a particular meaning tied to the emotional and psychological life of the dreamer. For women, Freud saw recurring symbols in dreams as direct reflections of unconscious desires and conflicts, particularly related to autonomy, creativity, and emotional connection. He pointed out that the female unconscious often expressed these themes through symbolic imagery, which reflected the tension between societal roles and personal desires. For instance, a locked door might symbolize a part of the self that feels inaccessible or shut off from the world, while a journey through unfamiliar terrain might mirror a woman's search for personal identity beyond the roles she has been assigned. Dream symbolism, for Freud, was not just about the individual's psyche, it was also about understanding how a woman's unconscious interacted with the broader societal pressures around her. He believed that by learning to interpret these symbols, a woman could begin to understand the hidden regions of her own mind and navigate the tensions between personal desire and societal expectation. What's striking about Freud's approach to dreams is that he didn't see these symbols as isolated, random images. He saw them as coordinates, clues that, when interpreted correctly, could begin to reveal the layout of the unconscious mind. By following these clues, one could trace the boundaries of the psyche and uncover the hidden desires and unresolved conflicts that shape a woman's emotional life. Modern psychology supports Freud's idea that the unconscious communicates through symbolism, though it now places greater emphasis on the context and personal experience of the dreamer. Contemporary psychoanalysts understand that dreams reflect the complexities of the unconscious mind, which are shaped by early experiences, cultural narratives, and relational dynamics. However, the core idea remains the same. By paying attention to the symbols that appear in dreams, we can gain insight into the hidden territories of the psyche. In the next part, we will explore the concept of repetition compulsion, which Freud described as the tendency to unconsciously recreate emotional experiences that mirror earlier unresolved conflicts. We'll see how this repetitive behavior often revolves around themes of validation, safety, and recognition. These patterns offer crucial insight into the hidden emotional maps that govern a woman's life. But for now, reflect on this. What symbols have appeared in your dreams, and how might they relate to the desires, fears, or unresolved conflicts in your unconscious mind? Learning to decode these symbols can be a powerful tool for understanding the hidden map of your psyche. Freud's theories laid the groundwork for much of what we know about the unconscious, but modern feminist psychoanalysis has expanded, revised, and often critiqued his ideas. While Freud was groundbreaking in his observations of the female psyche, his work was inevitably limited by the cultural norms of his time. These norms specifically, a deeply patriarchal view of women shaped his understanding of femininity. Contemporary psychoanalysts like Nancy Chodorow, Jessica Benjamin, and Juliet Mitchell have taken Freud's foundational ideas and reinterpreted them through a feminist lens, offering a richer, more complex view of the female unconscious. These scholars have expanded on Freud's notion of internalized ideals, showing that cultural narratives about femininity are not just unconscious beliefs, but systems of meaning passed down through generations. They argue that the female psyche is not merely shaped by individual upbringing or early childhood experiences, but by a collective, cultural inheritance. For example, Chodorow's work on gender development emphasizes how social and familial structures shape a woman's identity. She argues that women, particularly mothers, are often socialized into a caretaker role, which profoundly impacts their development and their relationships with others. In this way, societal expectations about femininity continue to influence the emotional landscape throughout life. Benjamin's work, on the other hand, focuses on the relational dynamics between mother and child, especially how women come to define themselves through these relationships. She introduced the idea of the relational unconscious, which stresses that a woman's sense of self is deeply intertwined with her relationships to others, especially her caregivers and partners. This perspective complicates Freud's view of femininity by acknowledging that women's identities are not just shaped by their internal desires or the imposition of external ideals, but by an ongoing process of negotiation and interaction with others. These modern theorists expand Freud's framework by recognizing that the female psyche is shaped not only by early childhood experiences, but also by the ongoing socialization process, which includes cultural narratives about gender, family roles, and relational dynamics. They also emphasize the possibility of change, noting that women today have greater opportunities to challenge these societal narratives and redefine their identities on their own terms. In essence, the map Freud drew has evolved over time, enriched by new psychological theories and modern feminist thought. The map is no longer static. Instead, it is an evolving, living document that can be continuously redrawn and reimagined based on lived experiences, new perspectives, and a commitment to personal growth and self-awareness. But how does this apply to the modern woman? In today's world, women are presented with more choices than ever before. Yet many of the same societal pressures still exist. Women are encouraged to break free from traditional roles, but new, equally restrictive ideals often replace them. The challenge now is not only to understand these old maps, but to navigate a new, rapidly changing terrain, one that requires a constant negotiation of personal desires, societal expectations, and the evolving definition of womanhood. In the next part, we'll explore how dreams and symbolism can serve as powerful tools to uncover hidden parts of the self. Freud believed that the unconscious communicates through symbolic imagery, particularly in dreams, and that by interpreting these symbols, women could begin to understand and navigate the hidden corners of their psyches. But for now, take a moment to reflect on this. How has modern society reshaped your own internal map? What cultural narratives about femininity have influenced the way you see yourself? Understanding these influences is key to navigating the complex terrain of the female mind. Freud's theory of internalized ideals goes beyond societal pressures. It dives into the very unconscious frameworks that shape how women see themselves. These internalized ideals, Freud argued, were not just cultural norms that women were taught consciously, they were deeply embedded in the psyche. So much so that women began to experience them as a natural part of their identity. These ideals, shaped by society's narrow vision of femininity, quietly influence the way women navigate their desires, relationships, and even their internalized ideals often dictate how a woman feels she should look, behave, or desire. These ideals may include societal expectations around beauty, passivity, or emotional self-sacrifice roles that often conflict with a woman's authentic desires and needs. Freud pointed out that these ideals don't just guide behavior, they actively overwrite a woman's sense of self, often without her realizing it. As a result, a woman may feel drawn to certain roles or relationships, not because they reflect her true desires, but because they align with an unconscious model of femininity passed down by society. For example, the ideal of the perfect mother, or the selfless wife, may shape a woman's sense of value, making her believe that her worth is tied to how well she can fulfill these roles. This is particularly problematic because it leaves little room for women to explore their individuality, creativity, or ambition. When these ideals conflict with the woman's authentic desires, they can lead to deep feelings of anxiety, dissatisfaction, and frustration. Freud's idea was that these ideals often became unconscious, hidden beneath layers of self-deception and societal conditioning. Women may feel a natural attraction to certain roles or expectations, but these feelings are not necessarily authentic. They are often a product of cultural programming. This means that women may unconsciously reject their true desires because they don't fit into the mold society has prescribed. The danger of internalized ideals is that they create a constant inner conflict. A woman may desire freedom, intellectual engagement, or sexual autonomy. But if these desires conflict with the ideals of femininity that have been ingrained in her, she may suppress them, unaware of the source of her dissatisfaction. Freud's theory suggests that this internalized conflict creates a distorted map of the self, where the authentic self is buried beneath the weight of societal expectations. Modern feminist psychoanalysis has expanded on Freud's work, showing how these internalized ideals are reinforced through social narratives and repeated cultural messages. Today, we understand that these ideals aren't just products of individual upbringing, they are part of a collective, unconscious narrative about what it means to be a woman. And much like Freud suggested, this narrative often limits women's ability to explore their true potential. However, the good news is that recognizing these internalized ideals is the first step toward breaking free from them. Through self-reflection, therapy, and conscious effort, women can begin to challenge these ideals and reclaim their true desires. By acknowledging that these ideals are not inherent truths, but rather social constructs, women can begin the process of rediscovering who they truly are, free from the constraints of societal expectations. In the next part, we will explore how the map of the female psyche continues to evolve, particularly as modern women face new pressures and opportunities in a rapidly changing world. We will look at how cultural narratives around femininity are continuously redrawn, and how women can actively participate in this reimagining of their inner world. But for now, reflect on this. What internalized ideals shape your sense of self? What expectations do you carry that may not truly align with your authentic desires? Recognizing these influences is the first step in reclaiming the power to redraw your map.